We're thrilled to have welcomed our first grandbaby recently. But growing this precious human hasn't been easy on our daughter. The unrelenting pregnancy fatigue really took it out of her.
One thing that helped was keeping her fluids up, and she loved Rehydrate. Rehydrate is an essential electrolyte drink made by some great guys right here in Brizzy. It's safe during pregnancy and breastfeeding and is like a magical little energy and hydration boost for mum and bub.
If you're growing a little human or are just feeling a little run down, grab some at Coles today.
This is the Happy Families podcast with Dr. Justin Coulson. We're Luke and Susie, and this is the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
And Suze, this is great. This is your question. You want to try and get permission from our parenting expert to find out when is it okay to ignore our kids? You're done, you've had enough, and you want approval for this, Suze.
To give you what was going through my head about this, Dr. Justin Coulson's in studio with us, and we've been talking with Justin for a long time now, and I've learnt, I think, a little bit about the style of parenting that he promotes. And it's quite a shepherding approach. It's a guiding and leading approach with our children. And when I thought about this in the context of ignoring children's behaviour, I suddenly thought, I wonder if that's something that you would approve of in certain contexts, because is that really teaching our children what is not okay?
Yeah, so because we tend to have a switch full on, switch full off kind of theories of parenting. What do you think, Justin? Is it ever okay? When is the time to ignore kids' poor behaviour?
That's a really good question.
I've put you in. I guess the question really is there ever a time where it's appropriate to ignore children's behaviour? Because we hear it a lot, just ignore them. But is that actually guiding and teaching our children through whatever they're doing?
You know, the place where people usually will say you should ignore your child's behaviour is during like a toddler tantrum. Yeah, the child's going absolutely bananas. You need to ignore them. I have a different way of approaching things. If a child's going bananas, it's because they've got some sort of an unmet need. It might be because they want something that they can't have. I want to play with the iPad. Well, no, it's not screen time. I want to go outside and play on the swings. I know, but it's raining and it's 4 degrees. They have these big tantrums, and some people say, well, you just ignore it and it'll go away. When I was a kid, when I was a toddler, I used to hold my breath.
Oh.
And my mum was told by the paediatrician that she needed to ignore it. And she said, but if I ignore it, he'll pass out. And the paediatrician said, that's right. And so mum ignored it and I passed out. And it happened a couple of times. I would actually hold my breath until I passed out.
Wow.
But eventually, apparently, I stopped doing that. I'm here today to tell the story. I've been affected by it, obviously.
I was thinking, what happened in the end?
Well, clearly,
Did it all turn out?
look at the way my brain works. Dear me. So I don't necessarily think that ignoring it is a good idea unless you want your children to pass out or unless you want them to. I mean, you think about it. When you ignore your kids, does that improve their behaviour? If the kids are fighting with each other, does ignoring them make them suddenly go, I'm not getting attention from my parents. I think that I'll start behaving now. They usually actually make things worse. If you ignore a toddler tantrum, the toddler continues to tantrum. What we need to do instead is understand what's going on with our children. I recommend time in rather than time out. If a child's having a hard time, it's because they don't know how to deal with the emotions that they're feeling. They don't know how to behave appropriately in the situation, and they don't need to be left alone at that point. Now, sometimes you might have a child who is losing the plot and is non-responsive. So a case in point, one of my daughters at the dinner table one night a few years ago, young child, didn't want dinner, started to have a great big dummy spit, throwing the knife and the fork on the floor, tried to get the bowl and throw that on the floor as well, rescued the bowl just before the whatever it was went all over the tiles. But there's this moment where I recognise that this behaviour is not okay, and if I ignore it, it's only going to get worse. So I picked her up and I tried to give her a hug, and you know what toddlers are like when you try to give them a hug?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she was fighting, she was trying to punch me in the head and all sorts of things. It's pretty funny actually, because no matter how hard they punch you when they're toddlers, it doesn't hurt. So you like, hit me again, come on, you gotta do it. It's the only time that you'd ever say that, but I took her out of the room and I tried to hug her and I tried to have some time in with her. She didn't want that. So at that point you might say, well, just ignore her and let her calm down. again, I don't think ignoring is exactly the right thing. So, because ignoring feels like a punishment.
Yeah.
Ignoring feels like you're doing something to that child to make them pay a price for their bad behaviour. And I don't like making kids suffer, at least not in a punishment kind of way. I mean, if they, yeah. So I said to her, I can stay with you because you're having a hard time, or I can leave if you'd rather be on your own. So there's a degree of choice here for this 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah.
And she
That's not ignoring, that's acknowledging.
Exactly. And so she screamed at me. She said something like, "Ah!" You know,
Articulate
yeah,
girl.
yeah.
Yes.
She told me to go away, I think is what she was saying. And I said, I get the feeling that you're telling me to go away. I can go away if you want, but I'd really like to give you a cuddle. And she screamed at me again. I said, okay, you don't want me near you, so I'm just going to wait over here by the door. And so I walked over to the door and she screamed at me again. I said, based on what you're saying to me, I feel like you'd rather me just leave you alone. So as soon as you're ready for a cuddle and as soon as you're ready to sit with us quietly and peacefully, I'd love for you to come and let me know. So at no point am I ignoring her. At no point am I giving her a time out. I'm letting her know that I get how she feels. She's upset. She's feeling horrible. Give her some space. But she's welcome back as soon as she's willing to play by the rules.
Yeah.
And so I stepped out of the room. And as I stepped out, I turned around one more time and I said, just before I go, you sure you don't want to cuddle? And at that point, she ran to me with arms open and she wanted a big hug. And I said, would you like to come and join us for dinner now? And she said yes. And we sat down and we had a peaceful dinner.
Yeah.
Now, you can do that sort of thing. Now, there's been a couple of times where I've said, would you like a cuddle now? And they've screamed at me again. So I've walked out of the room, waited outside the room for 30 seconds, and then opened the door and said, I just thought I'd come back one more time and see if you want a hug. And they usually come to me then. They just need that little bit of space, but not as a punishment, just as a bit of space. And it doesn't matter whether the child is 2 or 22 or anywhere in between. Ignoring them just makes them feel invalidated, makes them feel unworthy, makes them feel like they don't matter. And their opinions and their worldview is irrelevant.
So often the logic, though, is if their behaviour, if their tantrum is deemed to be just attention-seeking, then that's when we should ignore them. Which
It
to
doesn't
me
make sense.
Well,
If they
yeah.
want attention, give them attention.
But it's quite the interesting, because I can understand negative attention, like negative behaviour. So this is the theory. If they do negative behaviour, then you get my attention. I'm reinforcing doing negative behaviour versus getting the attention when there's good behaviour.
So this comes out of the 1960s, 1970s. A psychologist called B.F. Skinner. He used to do experiments with pigeons and with rats, and he would offer reinforcement or punishment to get them to behave in certain ways. And the argument of psychologists was, if you respond positively to negative behaviour, you're going to reinforce negative behaviour. Now, I can tell you that the research does not, the current research does not necessarily support that view. How do I say? Okay, form follows feelings. Our children's behaviour is a direct response to the feelings that are inside them. So when we respond to a child's challenging behaviour, we're not reinforcing the behaviour, we're responding to the feelings that underpin the behaviour. In other words, a child's behaving in a bad way because they're having a hard time, they're feeling horrible, so we don't respond to the behaviour, we respond to the feelings. We say, you're having such a hard time this morning, you just don't feel like getting out of bed and getting on with the day. You'd rather not go to school because you feel awful today, or you feel lonely, or you feel isolated at school, or you feel this, this and this. The behaviour is irrelevant. It's the feelings that underpin it that matter. And when we ignore the behaviour, we also ignore the feelings. And that's where kids start to have self-esteem issues. That's where kids start to struggle with resilience, because they feel like we don't care about them. Not their behaviour. They feel like we don't care about their feelings, which means we don't care about them.
Oh, I love that. And I can see the logic of it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I mean, it makes sense because for years I've always thought that on the one hand it logically makes sense to don't reinforce the negative behaviour. On the other hand, it was the least sensical thing I've ever heard, because if they want attention, then surely as a parent, my job is they're deprived of something, and if attention's it, I can give them that.
You know what I call ADD? Everyone's been banging on about ADD for a couple of decades now, attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
I call it something different. I call it adult deficit disorder. The kids aren't getting enough of us, and that's why they're playing up. It's incredible what happens. It doesn't matter. I mean, you think about the times where your children have been having a hard time and you've stopped what you've done, you've looked them in the eyes, you've listened to them, and you've spent 2 minutes or 20 seconds with them in that moment. Yeah. Do they turn around and say, I'm just going to keep on behaving like a bullhead because I can? Yeah. Like they don't. They calm down. They respond. They feel understood. And we get rid of the challenging behaviour. But when we ignore them,
Yeah.
Or when we get angry at them, we just blow it up and make it worse.
What happens if they're just being plain annoying? Justin, can we ignore them then?
What do you do with Susie when Susie's being plain annoying to you?
Oh, no, I lock her in a room. I put her in a...
And Susie
and a
says, thank
massive
goodness,
time,
45 minutes of peace and quiet. Yes! I've been waiting for this. May I have some dinner while I'm in here?
No, quite frankly, if Susie's being annoying, I take everybody out. We leave her here. We'll come back when you've had a good think about your actions, Susie.
And Susie says, I should behave like this
That's right.
all the
That's
time.
reinforcing the behaviour, that's for sure. Dr. Justin Coulson, thank you so much for addressing that question that's been bugging in my head for a little while. I really appreciate it.
That's a pleasure.
And of course, there are loads of resources available, lots of information, books, podcasts and programs. You can find them all at happyfamilies.com.au. But if listening to Dr. Justin Coulson makes you think that people in your organisation or school could benefit from hearing him as well, you can find out how to have Justin speak for your school or organisation at justincoulson.com.